Thanks for joining us, Melanie. We really appreciate you taking the time and traveling back to Arizona and spending your afternoon speaking with students as well as coming to talk with us.
It's my pleasure.
So would you mind introducing yourself, kind of telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So my name is Melanie Katzman. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I got my PhD here in ASU in this building. I've used that degree, which is really very much a research degree with a clinical application in a number of different ways. And that's led me through many, many different pathways that have ultimately led to my currently running two companies. One that I founded, Katzman Consulting, and that's all psychologists that work in the workplace with individuals, helping leaders be more impactful, organizations get along better, and community and business groups pursue perhaps a larger purpose with greater impact. And my other organization is called Leaders Quest, and equally there we look at the mindset shift that people need to have in order to recognize who they want to be in the world, what platform they have, and how to leverage that with intention.
That's great. So how would that consulting compare to, say, like one of the consulting leaders like Bain or something like that, where it's more business
Funny you should ask that question. So actually I work very closely with Bain. And the work that we do with Bain through Leaders Quest is to help their leaders become better muses, if you will, consultants to the CEOs, helping people develop a point of view by widening their aperture, to understand how their presence makes a difference, to look at the quality of their decision making. So to move beyond, say, product-based consulting to really looking at, again, impact, citizenship, responsibility. So that's one of the ways. And then the other is, again, working with the Bains and McKinseys of the world. Oftentimes they'll come in, they'll create a game plan which will be moving people or organizations in certain ways, but just because you put the names in the boxes doesn't mean that people will actually perform the activities. So that's where I come in and really try to help clear the individual obstacles and sometimes the interpersonal obstacles that happen whenever there's a transformation going on.
So how would you say that psychology has prepared you to kind of do that interpersonal analysis?
It is the only way to get prepared. I mean, I am just a huge believer in psychology because I believe that anybody who doesn't study psychology is missing out on kind of the secrets to success. I mean, psychology is such a broad discipline that you can study things from a clinical perspective, you can study it from a biological basis of behavior, you can understand the group dynamics, the social, the implications for marketing. There's no place that psychology doesn't have a role, as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely. That I would have to agree. It's such a broad industry and field that you can really apply it anywhere.
And when I tell the story of my career, I can tell it now where it sounds like it has a red line that goes all the way through that you can follow the narrative. But I think the thing that is actually present in every place is that because I enjoy people, I understand people, and I can help create conversations that wouldn't perhaps otherwise happen, there's a commonality. Like I'm always looking for how the individuals will make a difference, and then how that difference will impact a group, and then how that group individual interface can be used to empower the individual and to empower the group. So there is a commonality, but the commonality in my work is the psychology, if you will. To be empirically based and to be able to talk about behavior from an empirical perspective makes a huge difference, because it's not this kind of, oh, off the cuff, I think and feel that this is what's going to happen. I can show you that if we shift this, this will happen. And so there's, I think, a growing awareness and appreciation of psychology in a way that was not always the case. So early on in my career, the business consulting I did was called Psychology at Work. And several of our clients said, please change the name. It's too intimidating. Psychology was scary. Now I think there's been a real shift. In fact, so much so that Katzman Consulting, which took the psychology out of the name, now has psychology on the front page of its website, because we're proud that that's our differentiator. And I think that we've seen a real change over time with an appreciation that psychology is an important differentiator in business.
Tell us a little bit about your new book and about kind of maybe what the content is.
So the new book is called Secrets from a Business Psychologist, and it's 52 ways to achieve joy, success, and impact at work. And I wrote it because after 30 years of oftentimes teaching the same thing over and over again, I'm surprised at how much people don't know about the impact of their behavior, that small things matter, that the way you show up and how you behave every single day can have a huge impact on your environment and on the people you work with, and that what often happens is that companies create these huge initiatives, very expensive training programs, put up banners and signs in the elevator about how they're going to be good people or engage with their community, and oftentimes miss the fact that the way in which we treat each other as humans at work makes a bigger difference and costs a lot less money, takes a lot less time. And so my book is 52 ways. So you could do one each week. You could do a campaign around it. You can make a personal commitment. But everything is really easy to do, doesn't cost anything. And it's an opportunity for me to give back to all the people that taught me so much when they were my clients.
So would you mind sharing maybe one of the ways that...
So one of the ways, so a very simple one actually is, believe it or not, say got it. Like you receive an email, let somebody know that you got it, give them a time when you're going to respond. People hang around at work going, gee, do I have to answer this tonight, tomorrow? Am I ever going to get the information I need? So just recognizing that people want to have agency over their time. So letting them know that they have been, their message has been received and that they have some predictability about when you're going to either engage with them, give them the information they need, is a huge stress reducer. Another is see everybody. That too often we walk into a room, we see the people we think are important or we need to know, and we don't introduce everybody, or we don't actually make a point of recognizing whether it's the person in the cafeteria, the person emptying your garbage. They probably know a lot more about you and about what's happening in the environment that you're working in than you do. And so spend time with everybody. Nobody should be invisible. The other is embrace aging at work. We have an aging population. It's not about pushing people out, but actually recognize that oftentimes you reach a point in your career where there's a greater opportunity to say what you think and act on it than when you were in the early stages of your career. And many times the people who are at the end of their career and the people who are just coming into the workforce have more in common than they realize. And so the big dreamers I often find are the ones who are on both ends of the spectrum. And so bringing people together across that gap, I think, is a place to really re-energize the workforce.
What's been one lesson that stands out to you that you've learned from maybe one of the groups that you've managed there, from a leadership perspective, just how your mindset shifted as part of working with other people?
I think the biggest lesson I learned over and over again is you have to find the right level of connection, and that there's a way to find the person. And too often people come together and they look at the differences in terms of how they dress, where they work, what their title is, what their business card says, car they're driving, what bicycle they're driving, and that there is a shared human point, and you have to figure that out. And once you do, then a conversation can flow. So one of the great examples is I brought a leader of an Indian newspaper establishment to a community where we met with a woman who was living above a whorehouse, raising her daughter in a corner. So she couldn't afford the room. She was afforded a corner of the room, and she herself was not a prostitute, but was living above this prostitution because that's what she could afford. And I was trying to show this media executive just the expanse of world that he's covering, but the eyes and ears and faces of the people who are in the stories that he's telling. And in preparation, she had said, what am I going to say to him? I have nothing to teach him. And he said, I'm just so ashamed. Like, how can I show up there? What have I done for people like this? And so we ended up talking about, just starting off and talking about families. And she's trying to raise her daughter the best she can, and he's trying to raise his son the best he can. And from that place of shared concern about the next generation, we were then able to talk about the questions that each of them asked themselves. And we forgot that we were sitting above a brothel. We forgot that we were sitting on the floor. We were really just talking as people about the next generation. And then we could start to layer on the other conversation. So I think one of the things I've learned, perhaps this is the psychology inside of everything, is you got to find that place where people relax, talk as people, and then you build up from there. We have so many conflicts that are created because of our faulty internal dialogue, our lack of willingness to take the risk and just have a conversation that needs to happen. So the book, I feel, is different than a lot of books that have been written in business because it's written by a psychologist. So when I look at the business section of Barnes & Noble or other places where you can go and actually see the book titles, they all seem to have red spines, one word titles. They often are written by men, and they're all about kind of power to, and I get concerned about that. A, because they're written for the leader. Usually it's the male titan of industry, written by somebody who has run their successful companies, now going to tell you their secrets. And I wanted to have a voice that came from a different place, that was more psychological, and that it would be a book that everybody could read. So a lot of books are not written for people who are running a mom and pop shop. So I want the guy who's running a shop on Main Street in the middle of America to be able to read the same book that a woman who's running an IT firm in Silicon Valley is reading. In every chapter, there are examples that come from someone who holds a very highly recognized position to someone who's an invisible leader. I have examples of organic farmers in China, of clowns in Brazil, of financiers in New York, of garbage men in Chicago, so that people will find themselves in the book and equally be able to have conversations with people who would be in many, many different positions.
So with your experience working at a variety of organizations, big and small, what would you say would be like a hidden piece of advice for students starting to look for their first job or maybe their first internship? What would be a piece of advice that you would find to be super important?
Do your research so that any of the questions that you ask aren't ones that could be answered on the website. People are putting out tremendous amounts of information about their organizations these days. Pay attention to that before your interview. Check the LinkedIn page, check the Twitter feed, know what that organization is saying and doing in the world, and then if you ask a question that demonstrates that you've taken the time to do the research. And better yet, ask a provocative question. Not provocative as in disrespectful, but one that is thought-provoking. I think people get tired of interviewing and having the same questions all the time, and you demonstrate your unique way of thinking by showing how you've synthesized the information that's been available, that you've taken the time to do that, and you're putting it back and actually making the interview interesting for the interviewee.
What sort of personal characteristics would be, in a qualified candidate?
Curiosity. I think everybody has a story to tell, and being interested in that story will always make life interesting. So I would tell anybody that going just to class isn't enough, that the university is stocked with brilliant people who are there to help you learn. Take advantage of that.
If you were to talk to an undergraduate now and recommend that they get involved, how would an undergraduate get involved?
Well, I think the first thing is really looking at undergraduate research opportunities, talking to your professors and seeing, what you can do to sit alongside a professor's work. So I would absolutely do that. I would look at a spectrum of psychology classes. So as you're here as an undergraduate, figure out the different expressions of psychology. Marketing has a psychological, basis. Management has a psychological basis. So there's a way to explore psychology across campus to understand the applications, because then I think as a psychology major, you come out understanding even better the different ways that you can use that.
So kind of going on that last statement there, making a difference where no one else is looking, how has that kind of driven your career? Because it seems like that's a providing theme.
It's actually a very good question. So if I even go back to my days in the learned helplessness labs looking at depression, depression is a big topic. Learned helplessness was a growing area. So I wanted to find the corner that I could make a difference in. And while we were studying control and predictability and the effect it had on alcohol consumption in rats, I said, let me modify that a bit and look at food consumption. And then that actually led me to looking at appetite abnormalities, and that then brought me into study of obesity, that then brought me into bulimia. In each of these instances, I looked for something that was connected to the mainstream, but not in the spotlight. And then I could be the person who would help build up that. So there's an entrepreneurial element in me where I like to develop things that nobody else has because it's creative. I think we often end up with a group think where everybody's studying this, therefore everybody's studying this. Well, there's other things always to study, right? And so one of the things I learned at ASU was it's the quality of your question. Ask a good question. So figure out what's the question no one's asking or isn't asking in the right way, because probably there's something there.
Well,
right.
So thank you so much for coming in. We
fun
really,
talking
really
to you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, you're the
right.
person to talk to.
Thank
Do
you.
my interviews again.
Well, this is fun.